On November 6, 1898, just after sunrise, a railroad inspector named Samuel Whitcomb stood at the mouth of an abandoned tunnel in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania and noticed something that did not match the file he had been given. The file said the tunnel was unsafe. It said the roof had weakened, the interior supports had failed, and the passage had been abandoned because of repeated collapses. It was the kind of explanation that appeared in railroad paperwork all across the country in the late 19th century. A tunnel became expensive. A route became inconvenient. A company changed ownership. Then the language arrived: unstable, impractical, hazardous, discontinued. But as Whitcomb lifted his lantern and stepped inside, the tunnel did not look like a grave of broken stone. The rails were still there. The first line of wooden supports still stood along the walls. Some were damp. Some were bowed with age. But they had not failed. The ceiling was scarred by old drill marks and black powder blasts, yet it did not show the kind of catastrophic fractures described in the report. There were no mountains of fresh rubble blocking the passage. No twisted steel. No collapsed roof swallowing the track. The tunnel was quiet, cold, and strangely intact. Whitcomb walked deeper. His boots struck the ties with a hollow rhythm. Water dripped somewhere ahead. The air smelled of coal smoke, wet limestone, and something older, something metallic. Nearly half a mile from the entrance, where the company map showed the tunnel continuing through the ridge, the rails ended. Not at a fall of rock. Not at a collapsed section. At a wall. It had been built across the tunnel from floor to ceiling using rough stone and heavy mortar. It did not look like an emergency patch. It did not look like a collapse repair. It looked deliberate. The stones were fitted too carefully, and the base had been packed with gravel, as if whoever built it wanted the barrier to hold for a long time. Whitcomb moved his lantern over the surface. Near the center of the wall, painted in white letters that had begun to peel in the damp, he read 4 words: "Do not breach." That was the moment the official explanation began to fall apart. Because if the tunnel had been abandoned because of collapses, why had someone built a wall deep inside it? If the danger was at the entrance, why not seal the entrance? If the roof had failed, why were the supports still standing? And why would a railroad company leave a warning not to dig through a barrier in a tunnel that was supposedly already ruined? Whitcomb did what inspectors were trained to do. He wrote down what he saw. He measured the distance from the entrance to the wall. He noted the condition of the timbers, the rails, the drainage ditches, the ceiling, and the air. Then he recorded one detail that would later become the most troubling line in the surviving account. There was a draft coming through the stones. Cold air moved from behind the wall into the abandoned tunnel, faint but steady, as if the passage continued into a space larger than the map admitted. This is the case that opens the larger question. Not whether one railroad tunnel was abandoned for mysterious reasons, but whether a pattern existed across pre-1900 America, hidden beneath technical language and forgotten infrastructure. The official story says these tunnels were closed because they collapsed, flooded, or became too expensive to maintain. In many cases, that was certainly true. Tunnels were dangerous. Railroads were ruthless businesses. The mountains swallowed bad engineering without ceremony. But some tunnels were not simply abandoned. They were interrupted. They were sealed from within. They were shortened on later maps. Their reports changed from specific engineering language to vague administrative phrases. Workers were reassigned. Survey notes disappeared. Local rumors were dismissed. And the same explanation appeared again and again, as if one word could bury every unanswered question: collapse. By the end of the 19th century, the American railroad system had carved thousands of miles of track through mountains, valleys, coal fields, deserts, river corridors, and mining territories. The railroads did not merely cross the land. They opened it, wounded it, reorganized it, and in some places cut directly into underground worlds that had never been mapped. Before modern geological surveys were standardized, railroad tunnels were often built with incomplete knowledge. Engineers worked from surface observations, mine reports, local guides, company pressure, and the brutal arithmetic of distance. A tunnel saved time. Time saved money. Money justified risk. So men drilled, blasted, shoveled, braced, and advanced into ridges that no one fully understood. Most of what they found was exactly what they expected: sandstone, shale, coal seams, water, clay, limestone, unstable rock, gas pockets, old faults. But the deeper question is what happened when they found something they did not expect. The paper trail gives us only fragments. In Pennsylvania, Whitcomb's inspection appears in a later summary rather than a full original report. The summary refers to an internal obstruction of masonry construction and air movement beyond sealed section. Those phrases are dry. They do not shout. They do not accuse. But in railroad engineering language, they are strange. A collapse is not masonry construction. An obstruction built by hand is not the same as a fallen roof. And air movement beyond a sealed section suggests the tunnel did not end where the company later claimed it ended. The Pennsylvania Tunnel was not the only case. In West Virginia, a coal hauling spur was reportedly abandoned in the early 1890s after a tunnel crew broke into what one local newspaper called old workings of uncertain origin. The phrase was quickly replaced in later summaries by unstable mine void. That change seems minor until you understand the difference. Old workings implies a human-made space. Mine void implies an industrial hazard. One invites questions. The other closes the file. In Kentucky, a short mountain tunnel built for a private freight line was listed as closed after roof distress. Yet a later county account described men hauling brick and lime into the tunnel 3 weeks after the supposed collapse. Why haul masonry materials into a tunnel whose roof had already failed? Why spend money building inside a passage no longer worth saving? In Nevada, survey revisions show a pre-1900 rail tunnel that appears longer in an early construction diagram than in a later operational map. The missing length is not marked as collapsed. It is simply absent, as if the tunnel had always stopped short. A maintenance account from the same period refers to closing the interface. Not the mouth. Not the approach. The interface. In Colorado, a mining railroad tunnel near a silver district was reportedly sealed after workers heard what they described as hammering beyond the abandoned heading. The official explanation was water damage. But the receipts preserved in a regional archive mention iron gate hardware, chain, and a lock ordered for interior safety control. Again, the pattern returns. Not a collapsed tunnel. A controlled boundary inside the tunnel. Individually, each case can be explained away. A wall might stabilize a weak zone. A gate might prevent trespassing. Map revisions might reflect corrections. Vague language might be ordinary bureaucracy. Workers might misunderstand noises underground. Local newspapers might exaggerate. Memories might grow stranger with time. But the pattern becomes harder to ignore when the same anomalies repeat across different places, different companies, and different years. The first anomaly is the survival of tunnels supposedly destroyed by collapse. In several cases, later explorers, inspectors, or local accounts described tunnels that remained structurally passable for hundreds or even thousands of feet. If a tunnel had truly been abandoned because the roof had failed throughout, the visible conditions should have matched the severity of the official claim. Instead, some appeared neglected but not destroyed. The second anomaly is internal sealing. A company concerned only with public safety usually blocks the entrance. It posts warnings, boards the mouth, fills the approach, or removes track. But a wall built deep inside a tunnel has a different purpose. It allows someone to enter the outer passage while preventing access to a specific interior section. That does not protect the public from the tunnel. It protects the sealed section from the public. The third anomaly is altered mapping. Early construction maps often show intended alignments, tunnel lengths, shafts, grades, ventilation points, and exits. Later maps were sometimes simplified for operations. But in certain cases, the simplification does something more suspicious. It erases the problematic area. A tunnel becomes shorter. An exit disappears. A branch is omitted. A service heading is no longer named. The geography of the underground is quietly revised. The fourth anomaly is language. Railroad documents were usually practical. Engineers wrote about water, rock, timber, grade, clearance, ventilation, cost, and load. But in the strange cases, language becomes blurred. Unsafe condition. Interior obstruction. Unserviceable section. Discontinued beyond point. No further inspection advised. These phrases sound official without revealing anything. The fifth anomaly is witness behavior. Men who worked underground knew danger. They were not easily impressed by darkness, echo, bad air, or falling rock. Yet several accounts describe workers refusing to return, foremen ordering silence, crews reassigned without explanation, and local rumors that persisted long after the tracks rusted. The question is not whether every abandoned tunnel hides a secret. Most do not. The question is why certain tunnels were treated as if their deeper sections had become sensitive. To understand that, we have to look at what railroads were actually doing before 1900. They were not neutral transportation systems. They were private empires with political protection, land grants, investors, legal teams, and reasons to control information. A tunnel that revealed dangerous engineering could bankrupt a project. A tunnel that intersected disputed mineral claims could trigger lawsuits. A tunnel that exposed human remains, unregistered mines, illicit activity, or unexpected archaeological material could delay construction and invite authorities. A railroad company had every incentive to simplify a problem. If something unusual was found underground, the fastest solution was not always to investigate. It was to seal, relabel, reroute, and move on. This may explain why collapse became such a convenient word. It was technical enough to sound credible, frightening enough to discourage curiosity, and common enough to attract no special attention. A collapsed tunnel does not invite explorers. A collapsed tunnel does not demand a public report. A collapsed tunnel can be crossed off the ledger and forgotten. But not all collapses leave walls. In the Pennsylvania case, Whitcomb's discovery forced a contradiction into the open. He was not sent to investigate a mystery. He was sent to evaluate whether an abandoned route could be reused. The company wanted to know if the tunnel was worth reopening for freight. His job was economic, not paranormal, not archaeological, not conspiratorial. That makes his observations more valuable. He had no reason to invent a wall that complicated his assignment. No reason to describe a draft if he was simply confirming a closure. No reason to record that the supports remained usable if the file said the tunnel had failed. After returning from the inspection, Whitcomb reportedly submitted a field memorandum recommending that the tunnel not be reopened without authorization to remove or examine interior barrier. That phrase is extraordinary. It means he did not consider the barrier natural. He considered it an object requiring permission. The response was not further inspection. The response was silence. The line was not reopened. The memorandum was summarized, not preserved in full. The tunnel remained abandoned. Later references returned to the familiar explanation: collapse risk. At this point, the investigation faces a choice. Either Whitcomb misunderstood what he saw, or the company deliberately avoided investigating a sealed portion of its own tunnel. The first explanation is possible. Inspectors made mistakes. Dim light distorts perception. Old repairs can look mysterious. Drafts can pass through cracks, drainage channels, or animal burrows. Painted warnings can be added later by workers, trespassers, or local pranksters. But the company's lack of curiosity is harder to explain. A railroad considering reopening a route would normally want to know what blocked it. If the barrier was a safety wall, there should have been a record. If it protected a collapse zone, there should have been engineering notes. If it marked a legal boundary, there should have been correspondence. Instead, the records grow thinner at exactly the place where they should become more specific. This is where the story widens from one tunnel into a national pattern of forgotten underground boundaries. Pre-1900 railroad tunnels often intersected earlier mining systems. In coal country, old drifts could run beneath ridges long before a railroad arrived. Some were mapped. Many were not. In the West, prospectors cut exploratory adits and abandoned them without formal records. In Appalachia, families, small operators, and companies dug into hillsides over decades, leaving behind voids that later engineers might encounter unexpectedly. A tunnel crew breaking into an old mine could explain many accounts of air movement, strange sounds, and unmapped spaces. It could also explain secrecy. If the railroad had accidentally breached another company's claim, or exposed unsafe illegal workings, it might be easier to seal the connection than litigate it. But some accounts do not describe mine timbers, coal seams, or tool marks. They describe stone chambers, fitted walls, dry air beyond wet tunnels, steps cut into rock, markings that workers did not recognize. These details are less frequent and less reliable, but they are the ones that kept the stories alive. In one Kentucky account, workers supposedly found a stone-lined cavity behind a sealed section and were told it was not part of the route. That phrase, like many in this investigation, is both simple and strange. Of course, it was not part of the route. That was the problem. The railroad tunnel had entered something older, or at least something outside the company's plan. In another Pennsylvania coal region story, a foreman allegedly ordered men away from a side opening after discovering carved notches in the stone beyond the rail heading. The official record mentions only a bad air pocket. Bad air is real. It kills. But bad air does not carve notches. Here the investigation must remain careful. The line between suppressed evidence and frontier folklore is thin. By the early 20th century, abandoned tunnels became magnets for ghost stories, bootleggers, treasure hunters, and local myth-making. A wall became a prison. A draft became a breath. A noise became a signal. Memory embroidered what paper left blank. And yet folklore often grows around real absences. People tell stories where records fail. The institutional behavior around these tunnels follows a recognizable logic. First, something interrupts work. Second, the official explanation becomes technical and nonspecific. Third, physical access is restricted. Fourth, later maps simplify or omit the affected area. Fifth, the people who actually saw the interior are replaced by paperwork written at a distance. Over time, the paperwork wins. The tunnel becomes a collapse. The wall becomes a safety measure. The sealed section becomes irrelevant. The missing records become normal archival loss. And the original question disappears. But every so often, someone like Samuel Whitcomb walks back into the dark with an old file and finds that the ground does not match the story. Imagine standing where he stood, half a mile inside a mountain, the world reduced to lantern glow and blackness, reading words painted on stone by someone who expected the warning to matter. Do not breach. Those words do not belong in a tunnel that ended by accident. They belong at a threshold. And thresholds are built when someone believes there is something on the other side worth separating from the world. The more cases we place beside one another, the less convincing the simple collapse narrative becomes as a universal answer. Collapses happened, yes. Floods happened. Bad engineering happened. Financial failure happened. But those explanations do not account for walls built inside tunnels, gates installed beyond public reach, maps shortened without notes, reports removed from accessible files, and witnesses describing spaces beyond the rails. The real reason some pre-1900 railroad tunnels were abandoned may not have been one secret. It may have been many. In some, companies may have encountered old mines and chose legal silence. In others, they may have exposed burial sites, human remains, or artifacts that threatened construction schedules. In others, they may have discovered natural caverns too unstable or too strange to risk public attention. In some, the explanation may have been criminal: hidden storage, smuggling routes, labor violence, or accidents that management preferred to erase. And perhaps in a small number of cases, the tunnels intersected structures that did not fit the expected history of the land being cut open. That possibility cannot be proven from the fragments alone. But it cannot be dismissed simply because the official word says collapse. The power of official language is that it ends curiosity. It gives the mind a place to stop. A collapsed tunnel is not a mystery. It is a hazard. Stay out. Move on. Nothing to see. But when the tunnel still stands, when the wall is built deep inside it, when the air moves from beyond the sealed stones, and when the maps quietly change, curiosity becomes the only honest response. By 1900, the railroad age was already rewriting its own past. Failed routes vanished from schedules. Company archives were consolidated, discarded, or lost in mergers. Local offices closed. Men who had built the tunnels aged, moved, or died. What remained were fragments: a payroll note, a supply receipt, a revised map, a county rumor, a field memorandum, a painted warning in the dark. That is how the underground record survived. Not as a clean confession, but as a series of misalignments. And in historical investigation, misalignment matters. When the document says collapse but the tunnel shows a wall, something is misaligned. When the map shows an ending but the air says there is space beyond it, something is misaligned. When the company says danger but refuses to describe the danger, something is misaligned. When the men who were there tell a different story than the men who filed the summary, something is misaligned. The final truth may be less sensational than legend suggests. It may not be giants, lost civilizations, or impossible machines. It may be corporate liability, mineral rights, unsafe old mines, dead workers, or inconvenient archaeology buried under the urgency of commerce. But that does not make the mystery smaller. It may make it more human. Because the story of these tunnels is also the story of how progress handles what it cannot use. It seals it. It renames it. It removes it from the map. Then it lets time do the rest. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, if Whitcomb's tunnel still exists, the wall may still be there behind rusted rails and fallen stone. The white letters may have faded. The draft may have stopped. The warning may be unreadable. Or perhaps behind the masonry, the air still moves through a passage that no official map admits. And that is why the old explanation is no longer enough. They may have abandoned many tunnels because of collapses. But some were abandoned because they reached something the companies did not want to document. The question is not whether every sealed tunnel hides a forbidden chamber. The question is how many times the word collapse was used to make sure nobody asked what was really behind the wall.